All right. So, um, welcome back. Hope you had a kick-ass weekend. I got to go to the mountains, did some hang times, but got some game audio stuff done, so I'm pretty excited. So, what we're gonna crank on this week, I guess, coming up here, is we're gonna try to get through lesson 5 by the end of the week this week on this Wise stuff. Because basically, what we want to do is we want to wrap up this Wise 301 or the Wise integration stuff by next week. So we have a fair amount to get through. So what I'm going to be doing is actually going to have this one. We're going to do lesson 3 today, lesson 4. I was going to do lesson 4 as an async one, but I think we're going to do lesson 4 as a sync, and then I'll do lesson 5 as an async, just because next class it's a doozy. So I think it's important that we all meet up and meet with that one kind of as a live thing. But it's also, I think, the most important one, which is cool. So, but what we're going to work on today is, I guess what I'm saying is, so basically there's like eight or nine of those certification classes, those lesson classes. And again, like I said, we want to try to get through those by the end of next week, because that will kind of wrap this section up. And so this is heavy stuff. I know, I get it. This is kind of a heavy section. So, but this is like, I think this is like the meat of it. This is where you're connecting your game engine to your audio engine, and having some fluency in this is critically important when you take on a real job. So, and then on that note, I'm gonna try to have a meeting probably next week with the digital design class that's doing game dev. That if you guys want to work on some independent projects, some actual projects, so you have some portfolio stuff. We have an amazing opportunity to do that. They're going to use Unreal. They're not using Unity, but we're going to get to Unreal in just a little while. So actually, that's what's coming up soon after all this stuff. So, cool. Well, let's do it. So what we're going to talk about today is how to load and destroy sound banks dynamically in the game. As we've kind of seen through the entire theme of one of the biggest themes of game audio is resource management. So, and one of the things is, like, basically we're trying to figure out how to minimize our memory usage when we start playing a game. And we can do that a number of different ways. We're going to look at things like dynamically loading and unloading sound banks on the fly. So up to this point, what we've mostly been doing is basically had one gigantic sound bank and load that sound bank. We basically just load that sound bank. It's called main, is what we called, like when we were playing Cube, we called the sound bank main. But that's generally not the best way to do things. And I guess when you're probably starting out a game, because you don't know exactly how the game's going to pan out, you'll probably start with a game called, like a game, like a general work unit or sound bank called main, and then you just load everything in there at once. But as the game develops, as you go along, as levels get built, as scenes get built, as different things like the interface for the user interface, that sort of stuff get defined, we're going to be able to do more granular loading and destroying of that. Because what we want to do is focus on how can we get the most sounds in there with the least amount of memory. So that's always the kind of the game. So we're going to look at a few different ways of doing that today. So and I'm kind of okay with this. I'm a little rusty with this, so you're gonna have to bear with me a little bit on this. So what I'm going to do is, let's get to share my screen. I'll share my audio. And I'm going to launch this off. Whoops. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to close all this out, because I'm going to put this all in this window over here. Let's start from ground zero. So what I did is last week I had gone through and I kind of showed, when we were doing the ambient stuff, that one of the strategies here is, well, number one, I had my system broken. I was using this one right here because I was using Unity 2018.4 and Wise 2019.2.6, and I was using I was using the modern version of Wise with the older version of Unity, and I had some synchronization issues. So my solution for that was to work around, and I built my own scene and worked with that, which I still think is probably one of the best ways to do this thing. But I've since updated it so that I can actually work with the real Wise and the real Unreal or Unity project, so I can actually follow along with what the lessons are telling us. But I do think there's a lot of merit in building your own scenes. So the strategy, I think the way to actually learn this stuff and not just like parrot and memorize this stuff, is to follow along, do all the stuff that they say to do in the lesson, then go over, create your own scene, and try to redo all the same stuff in your own scene using your own assets and using your own triggers and using your own all of that kind of stuff, because you're working with so many pre-built stuff. It's super easy to get lost in their their workflow, because it's just you're kind of following along, and it's pretty boring. Like I have to try really hard to stay awake. It's tough. But I decided just to make things clean. I decided for today. I decided to go through this. I was gonna do it using my own scene, and then you could translate that to the actual game project. But I was like, you know what? I should probably just do this for real. So what I did, and I wasn't sure if this was gonna work, but it does. So when you create your Wwise, I was able to use the same license for two different Wwise projects. So if you recall, if you basically when you get your license from Audiokinetic, um, that you can get it into your um, whatever license manager here, and you can say paste from clipboard, and you get that from Audiokinetic. So you can get that. Yeah, I gotta log in. So if you go to my messages, access has been approved. Close. Where did I get my close? Can't remember where I got my license. Oh well, actually, it's right here. You can actually just get your like you can pull it up, but basically you just copy and paste it. But the good news is, like I said, um, right in here with my Wwise projects, my projects here. You can look at your license. You can look at your license stuff from here if you need to view license details. So I have two different Wwise adventure games installed here. So I have both the 20.2, which is this is the one that's not working so good. This is the one that works really well, the 2019.1.4. So that's what I'm using today. So I'm gonna go back to my Unity thing here, and so this is the one that I'm gonna be working with today. So I open up the Wwise already, and let's open up the Unity and take a look at it. So this is the older version of Unity, and a couple of the windows have changed from the newest version to this, but it's pretty much the same. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to look at how do we load a sound bank using a trigger. So on this one, I'm going to go to Audiokinetic certification 301, lesson 3, loading sound banks using triggers. Cool. So we've got this woodland scene right here, and what we want to do is there's actually, if we look over in our Wwise project over here, we'll see that there is actually a woodland sound bank right here. So this is in my sound banks manager, my F7. So if I go to my sound banks manager here and break all this down, we have our default work unit, and I'm still a little fuzzy on. So we're still using default work unit, but then we have sub work units below that. So under our sound banks over here, we can see that we have our default work unit, but then instead of just creating sound banks, here we can create sound banks or we can create work units. And this one we're creating sub work units. And I don't know why you would do these as subs instead of just under the sound banks, but for whatever reason, they're still using default work unit as the main parent default work unit, and then they have sub work units down here, and then they also have an all-in-one. I don't know what that one is. We can see what all that stuff is in there. This is just the hierarchy of inclusion, but we're going to look at the regions right here, which is also the same as what we see over here. And we have this woodlands one right here. So this is the one we're looking at right here. What we want to do, the goal is when I walk into the woodland scene, I want the sounds to show up in the scene right when I do that. Because if like we're in our gigantic world here and I'm walking around, say over here, in this, whatever, the desert scene over here, if I'm walking around over here, it's kind of a waste to have all of these sounds loaded up in memory when they're like miles away. So what we can do is if I'm walking around as the main character, as I walk through here, walk through here, walk through here, walk through here, and then I get to this, to like say, well, we're going to do this, when I cross this bridge right here, because I think that's the only way you can get to the woodland scene. Oh, I guess you can get it to from over here too. But as we cross the bridge over here, what we want to do is we want that all the sounds to be dynamically loaded in there. That's really important though, that you got to make sure that none of these events are going to, that there's nothing happening in the background with events here that are going to trigger anything in the game, because they don't load and you get a bunch of errors. So in other words, if something like you've got birds chirping right here that are being called by something else in the game that that it's going to happen. It's going to start throwing a bunch of errors. So you have to really make sure that you have to really consolidate your events. So you got to make sure all the events that are going to happen in here are contained in that regional one. Now, so that's just for the woodland scene, because there's going to be other stuff like all of our characters, like our general stuff. Well, that's just general. Where's context, region, all in one. I'm trying to find all my people, my human ones. Well, they might not have them in there. I don't know where they are. Like all the footstep sounds and all the dialogue can be regional, but footstep sounds like swiping sounds of the sword, the vocal yeah, that kind of stuff, that all needs to be in a different sound bank that's loaded all the time. This is going to be just for region specific stuff. So that's what we're looking at doing here. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to do this by creating a trigger using a trigger object. So come on. We've seen this idea of an AK trigger a little bit when we walk through something. Well, what we can do is, instead of using the AK trigger on enter, what we want to do is, instead of having it like create a sound, like when I had it walk through, like the coin sound, for instance, when you walk through a sound and you hit the coin, it's going to go ding and make it sound like you got the coin. Well, instead of triggering a sound, we want to trigger loading a sound bank. So the cool thing is we can add the AK bank into our trigger system. So the first thing I'm going to do here is let's close all this up, and well, yeah, let's close all these up. Cool. What I want to do is I'm going to create a 3D object, a cube. Whoa, hello. I put that way up in the sky. I guess I'm pretty high up right now. Let's drop this thing way down. Get that kind of in the middle of the woodlands here. Oof, zoomed way out. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn this into a trigger. So I'm going to move this thing over here. Sorry, I'm moving your screen over to the other window. And let me bring up my chat. Cool. So what we want to do is, right now, if this object is just in the scene right now, it's not doing anything. It's just a box. But what we want to do is, let's change the name of this thing and call it woodland trigger. And what we would normally do, well, actually, let's stretch like if I wanted to stretch this thing out a bit. Right now, if it's just a box, if I were to run into this thing, because it's got a box collider selected on it here, if I was a character running into this, I'm just going to bounce off of this thing. So what we want to do is we want to turn this into something that's going to be a trigger instead. So the cool thing is we just say is trigger. And in doing so, now it becomes a trigger. What it's for, we don't know yet, but it's just saying it's a trigger. But in doing that, what it does is it actually makes it so that I can walk through this thing. So it doesn't have it's not a hard surface anymore. It's just a region. And if we were actually going to do this in the game, what we should do is turn off the mesh renderer, because we don't actually want to see the box when we walk through it. So what we would do is we would turn off the mesh renderer right there, and that would actually, or we can just remove the whole mesh renderer, and that would allow us to be this becomes a transparent box. We can see the outline of it right now in dev, but when you're playing the game, you wouldn't be able to see it. But for our purposes, what we want to do, we want to be able to see the thing while we run through it, so we can actually test the thing. So to make this a little easier, what we could do is they built a transparent thing here called trigger red. So actually I already saved there. If I do this thing called trigger red, it's just a semi-transparent color. Progress, come on. There we go. So what that does is it turned it so that you can kind of see it. It's this like translucent red, and you could create your own pretty easy in your materials. So if I were just to go this material here, all they did was you could just create your own and just reduce the alpha right here if you want to create your own version of this thing. But they already have one in there, so it's just as easy to use it. So let's get rid of that right there, and let's close up all this stuff. I accidentally selected on something. And so what we want to do now is this is going to be our trigger device for loading the sound bank. So what we want to do is we want to scale this thing up so that when you walk into the woodlands, it's going to trigger. So we want to cover this entire area about there. Let's make it nice and deep. And let me drag her down. Oops, move. So we know that no matter where you are in that scene, you're going to be getting, you're going to be able to be able to trigger this. So if you're walking along this one right here, along this path right here, and you hit this red box, it's going to trigger it right there. That looks pretty good. And if we go over here, if we cross the bridge, let's move it so that it's on the bridge. So that as soon as we cross this bridge, we're going to start loading those sounds in there. I could stretch that out, scale that up just one more bit, and move that back. That looks pretty good. Let's move it this way just a touch. Cool. So what that's going to do now is, well, we haven't set it up yet, but that's the plan is that as soon as I cross this threshold, it's going to launch all the sounds in there. So what we want to do is here, we want to add our component here, and let's do AK Bank. And we want to load the sound bank that comes in here. So what we want to do here is instead of load on start and destroy, we want to say load on trigger enter, and turn that start on, and load on trigger exit. Cool. So what this says here is that this bank is going to go on trigger enter and trigger bank. And so because we have this trigger right here as trigger, this is going to be looking for this. So now the problem with this though right now is that if I walk in that right now, it's saying it's listening for any kind of trigger. Anything that collides with this box right here is going to trigger this loading of the bank. And that's not what we want, because right now it actually has everything in this, like all these trees and the ground, those are going to be considered collisions. And so it's going to load that automatically. So what we need to do is we need to make it so that our character is the one that actually triggers this. So we're going to add the AK trigger component. AK trigger enter. And what we want to do is we want to assign that to the main camera, because whenever the main cameras are, well, it's not really our character, but it's, oops, I didn't load the sound banks in here. So I'm going to go to my Wwise picker and select on my woodlands right here, and I want my woodlands sound bank to go. This is what gets loaded when I walk through that thing. And we have when our camera enters in on this thing right here, it's going to load the sound bank. And but right now when it leaves, I don't have anything, so I have to do AK trigger exit as well. So I'm going to do AK trigger exit, and I also want to attach that to the main camera, so that when the main camera leaves this region, it deletes or destroys that sound bank. Okay, I feel like I'm blasting through this stuff right now. Does this make sense? I know it's a lot, but on a grand scale, are we conceptually understanding? The technical stuff you can review. You have all the stuff for this, but does it make sense kind of what our objectives are?
Yeah, it's all making sense to me. I think the only thing that I'm still kind of fuzzy on, which is kind of just like a practice thing, is like remembering what each of these
Components?
yeah, the components are, like, to know that, like, okay, when I want to do the sound bank, I got to use the AK bank and
Yeah.
AK trigger, things like that. But everything is kind of making sense in the workflow of it.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. I think through practice you'll get better at it. Just I'm not very good at it, but I feel like I'm starting to get the flow, like just by going through this a few times. But yeah, cool. All right, cool. Well, let's keep moving then. But please stop me if like I know this is moving pretty quick, but like, and I don't expect you to retain every bit of this. You have really good documentation. This is what I went off of, and in that documentation they also have all of the little sub videos that actually are really good. They walk through all this stuff in just a couple minutes, but it's really fast. But at least you're like, oh, I get it. I get what's happening there. Cool. Okay. So so let me save this. Let's actually see if this thing's working. So what we want to do, let me pull up Wwise real quick. And F6. So F6 is the profiler. And let's actually connect to the game real quick. So This is the advantage of actually getting it synced up using the right versions, is that it does see it. Cool. I'm gonna hit start, connect the game, and we're gonna start profiling the game. And what we want to look for here is, I'm gonna pull this off to the side. So I'm looking in memory right here. So we can look at our voices graph, which is interesting. But in our memory tab right here, we're going to look at what's taking up any of the memory stuff. So the stream, these are all the things that are using up memory while the game is being played right now. So if I press play, I'm going to go back to this. We can watch it load up. So we start to see all the stuff. So we have the general bank is loaded. Okay, what I'm going to do is play my game. I'm going to teleport over to the village. We can see our big box we created. I'm gonna oops, sorry. That was a mistake. So it's going to be a super small gameplay window, but that's okay. What was I looking for? Oh, yeah. Village. Okay. So what's going to happen is that as I cross this threshold, we should see that this thing will change. Now, when I cross that threshold, we see that it didn't change. And that's because it's attached to my camera. So as soon as my camera changes... Come on. Oh, I might need to generate my sound banks again. What I was expecting to see is I should see over... Oh, I'm disconnected. That's why. Let's try it again. Okay, cool. So we have Village Bank loaded. Let's get back in here. Bam, there it is. So we see the Woodlands Bank got loaded and all the sounds that are associated with the Woodlands Bank, and as soon as I leave it, it destroys it. And so if I run back in again, let's see what it costs. So that cost me 2 megabytes. So we saw that over here, that it loads 2 megabytes and destroys 2 megabytes. And you're like, 2 megabytes, who cares? 2 megs is nothing. But when you're on a mobile game, everything counts. And so, and this is a fairly simple thing we've got going on right now, but when the game's complex, this is going to get loaded up with a lot of stuff. And it's easy to go over your budget. If you're talking about mobile games, that's where it's a lot bigger deal. When you're talking on desktop games, you still are going to have a budget, especially when you were talking about something like, say, a platform like PS4 or Xbox, where you have a finite amount of RAM. When you're on a desktop, you have a kind of a flexible amount of RAM, but when you're on these consoles, they're going to have a definite hard budget on how much RAM you're allowed to use for what. So that's going to become a big deal. But the cool thing was there, and it just totally worked, is that we're able to create through this trigger. Now, if I was in real life, what I would do is I would on the Woodlands trigger, I would turn off the mesh renderer, and now when I play the game, you won't be able to see it, but it will still actually be loading up creating and destroying everything in that region, which is pretty rad. So that's going to be kind of the loading and unloading the triggers. Let's go back to this. The thing is, though, with the trigger thing, it works pretty well. But some games, it can be kind of complicated to manage this. When you're on some other games, you're going to have basically sub events. So if we look at this region, right, or the map overall, we've got a few different spaces. And what these are is they can actually be loaded dynamically. In the same way that we're loading up sound banks, you can actually load up different scenes, sub-scenes along the way. So what we would do, and this is like if you think about when you're playing your games and you're running along and you'll see the scene load, even though the game doesn't stop. So if you're playing a game where you have an actual chapter where it stops and it loads the next level, that's going to be where it's discrete scenes completely separate from one another. and you can't get back to the old one. But in some of these other scenes, other games where you have a humongous world that's like a free and open world, what they're going to do is they're going to dynamically load scenes, sub scenes on the fly. So that basically is creating and destroying. Because what you don't want to do is load the entire game into RAM, just because it's just way too big, and it's ridiculous to have this stuff loaded over here when I'm only running around over here for the next 2 hours or something. That I'm just sitting there processing this background information. So that's unnecessary. So what you can do is you can actually load up scene. We want to load this up by scenes, and so we can, instead of we're going to kind of go back the way we did it with ambience. So when we loaded up an ambient sound, it loaded with the scene. And so we're going to do the same thing, but now we're going to load up dynamically with different, like we're going to look up how to load dynamically with the separate scenes. So what I want to do is I'm going to create a separate sub scene with this thing here. And so I'm going to create I'm going to go over my project, and in my scenes, where's my assets? Scenes. I'm going to create a new scene. So let's go create scene. And we're going to do this as a woodland scene instead. And let's see. Oh yeah. So let's just call this woodlands. Sorry, I need to make sure yeah, there it is. So I've got my woodlands. I create a separate scene called woodlands right here, and I'm going to drag this one into my scene. And when I did that, it creates a sub scene, like secondary scene inside of here. And I'm a little fuzzy. I don't really understand how these scenes are managed. That's something I need to learn more about. But I've got two scenes in here, and this is going to be like my parent scene, and this is going to be like my sub scene. But what we want to do is we want to get rid of this camera here, this directional light here. So we just have our little our woodland scene right here. I'm going to hit Control S. And what I want to do now is I want to create an empty game object. And we'll call this one Wise. So this is like basically our Wise manager. And what I want to do is, instead of using the woodlands trigger right here to load the AK bank through the trigger, I'm going to load the bank over here in this. And what I did is by dragging, I was able to, it's like copying and pasting, or I could have created a new one over here. But what I did is I was able to just drag from my inspector over into my other scene here. And so if I look at my Wise, I see that my AK bank script is now loaded up right here. So this is what we want to do. We want to load this one up kind of the way we did with the way we did with ambience. So this is the one we want to do on awake. So I'm going to turn this one back to awake and unload on destroy. So this is not going to be triggered. It's not going to. It's no longer going to be using a trigger for this. It's going to be using the scene. So when the scene gets loaded, because the scene is what's going to be dynamically loaded. So let's save this up again. And we actually also want to do things like, so if we're running around, excuse me, we want to use just like, we can drag other things. Like, so right here, this is the waterfall. Right here, and like we don't have like a full waterfall, but this is the waterfall scene right here. And well, we're not seeing it right there. When you're playing, there's an actual waterfall here. So what we want to do is we want to drag the waterfall into this scene as well. So we can just drag that down in there, and we're good to go. Sorry, look at my thing. So we want to save. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, save the scene, just to make sure that it's saved. And so what we did is we created this scene. So now this woodland scene right here has these properties associated with it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to delete this one right here, remove the scene. The scene still exists. It just doesn't exist up here. It just exists up. It doesn't exist right here as a sub. And so what we want to do is on our woodlands trigger right here. This is the one that I think is a little confusing. So what we want to do is we want to add this component. It's called the AK. What is it? Sorry, load sync. Which one is that called? Load scene async. Yeah, load async on enter. So what this did right here is this said load async on enter. So it's going. What we want to do is we want to load the scene when I enter this script. So what we're doing when we on enter. So what it's going to do is it's going to load the scene over here. So what we have to do is we want it to load the scene that we just created right here. So to do this, we have to hit the scene to load. It says warning, no scene name. But the problem with this is it says it doesn't exist, even though I know that that scene exists. It created it. I know it did. The problem is that it's not. We need to add. We need to go to one more little step right here, and under our file, under our build settings, it's not right here. So the scenes in this build, it's not included in this one right now. So right now I'm targeting Windows, 64-bit Windows. So these are all the scenes that are like going to be in this build. So what I need to do is add another scene right here. So what I can do is I can just drag this scene up into here, and now I have scenes woodland. So now what that's going to do is and I have to make sure that it's below. I can drag it anywhere in this list, but it has to be below the main scene right here. So as long as it's below, it kind of loads all the stuff in this order. And it doesn't really matter what order these are loaded in. Maybe for some games it does, but for this one it doesn't. That we have to add the scene just in here. So, and then I can just hit save. And now, let's try typing this. Maybe I didn't save that right.
I think you have to add an S at the end.
Oh. Thank you. I appreciate that. I would have been running around forever looking for that. So on my now I added my woodlands right there, and it's weird because it doesn't autofill. That's one of the things I think is kind of annoying is that you actually have to type it out. There's no sub. It doesn't pull up the menu for you. It's not smart like that, which is annoying. Which is why I screwed that up.
Can you drag and drop it from the project manager or like the assets scenes?
Let's try that. Nope.
Okay.
Yeah. I do think I tried that before and it didn't work. So you just kind of have to know, which is really annoying. So what this is going to do is this is going to load the scene on async on enter. So but that's going to do is just load that one up, that scene right there. Now our scene doesn't really change anything. The visuals don't change. If you were working with a heavier, like a bigger game, what they would actually do is all this stuff will be created and destroyed when we actually do it. Right now, all we're doing is adding and destroying the audio scene, not the actual visual scene that goes along with it. But what we'd normally do is go attach all the visuals so that the visuals attached get created and destroyed along with this thing. Cool. Okay, so now what we can do is that's going to load that scene up, that we're loading the scene instead of just the sound bank because the bank is now nested inside of the scene. So let's try this again. Let's go over and watch this thing. Let's sync this thing up. Connect.
Is the waterfall that's connected to it visual or audio?
Right now we're just doing the audio. So
Okay.
we would I guess I don't know. Let's try it. You're right. I guess I grabbed the whole entire object. Let me go take. Well, I don't. Let's go see. Well, I don't know if we'll be able to see it, but because we can probably see it from a distance. We can't see it from the distance. Oops. Oh, and I turned it off so you can't see it, which is so my mesh render is still, or my mesh render is off. But let's see if you can see the waterfall. Well, we know that the Woodlands Bank did load when I crossed that threshold, which is good. Destroys it. I guess it just loaded it. I didn't have it destroy. Let's go see what that waterfall. So we saw that it loaded it up there, but I don't think I had a destroy in there, so it loaded it, and we didn't actually see the waterfall. We just saw the fuzz from the waterfall. So I guess we couldn't see if that was actually being destroyed or not because that doesn't show up over here. It just shows up our sound. We can't see it pop up over here. But yeah, so I guess kind of recap there. Those are our two strategies right now. We can load just a region. We can load up a sound bank based off of just a trigger region, or we can load it up off of a scene. And For small games, you're probably just going to load it up on trigger, like load banks based on triggers. But on large games, you're going to want to go loading up by scenes, and you can encapsulate all the sounds from that scene in that scene. So yeah. So the other thing that we wanted to consider here is this idea of compression, not audio compression, but data compression. So when we do this, let's go look at our compression, look at our settings over here. In our share sets, look at our conversion settings. So it looks like what they did is they created a number of different conversion settings for all the different kind of sounds here. And if we look at this conversion settings right here, that what they did is this is going to be done with Vorbis. So they pretty much went through. So these are all 44 for 1, 48K. These are all, some are stereo, some are, so this one was like the waterfall strong. It was original 2 down to 1. And so they basically, they say forced, you can say forced to channels. Yeah, forced to mono. So they're forcing everything to mono, and we're doing the format of Vorbis, and then they have different levels of Vorbis. So the quality of 2 to 4. So that means they're pretty heavily compressed, and we can see that the before and the after. So the original size was 1 megabyte, and it goes down to 32 kilobytes. So that's a huge drop in data usage. But the important thing here is that they're also, so it's going down to 35 kilobytes, but it's also so that's a 35 to 1 compression ratio. That's insane. That's a pretty big one right there. But we're seeing that we're using Vorbis as our compression method. So the cool thing about Vorbis is that it takes your audio, and just like MP3, it takes your traditional PCM audio, squishes it down super small, but then we're able to play it back. Now Vorbis, it's really important to note that Vorbis is lossy compression, data compression. So it will, like, once you compress it and uncompress it, it's going to have a different quality, different sound to it. And depending on how much quality you have here, we'll just say how high fidelity it is. But things like this, yeah, so you can see how they set this up. So for Android high, Android low, and iOS, they have quality of 2, but for Mac and Windows, they did a quality of 4 because they're allowing it to be a lot larger because we have more RAM available here. On these ones, we're going to have a more finite amount of RAM, so we want to squish things down a little bit. And I mean, you could say that people are probably going to wear headphones when they're playing games on their phone, but sometimes they don't even play games. It's just using their crappy little speakers. And so you don't need ultra high fidelity for this sort of stuff, especially for some of the sound effect stuff. Maybe for dialogue, you want to have it high resolution. But the thing is, when we do this, say you're doing something like a gunshot or footsteps, every time that you go, and it's stored in this Vorbis format, and it recalls this when the event is called from the game, or well, when the game call is called and it triggers an event in Wise, to play a Vorbis file back, it has to convert it back to PCM because you can't listen to Vorbis natively like you can with any compressed format. You can't listen to an MP3 natively. When you press play on an MP3, and I'm just using MP3 as an example, I'm talking about any kind of lossy compression format codec, is that when you press play, what it's doing is it's on the fly converting it back to PCM, and then because your DA converter on your sound card can understand PCM audio. It can't understand Vorbis. Vorbis is just data, or MP3 is just data. It's not actual audio files. So what it has to do is convert it back to PCM and play it, and that takes up CPU. So if you're doing something like Machine Gun, and you're playing back a Vorbis Machine Gun, it's going pop 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 pop. Every time it does a trigger, it actually has to use some CPU cycles to decompress it, play that sound back, then take the next one, decompress it, play that sound back. So while you save on data, what it does cost you is CPU. And on bigger machines, that's not really going to be that much of an issue. But on a small, like a Chromebook or any kind of web-based game, that's going to be that is not web-based, but on a phone, that's going to be an issue. So CPU can spike, and what you don't want to do is you don't want the audio CPU usage to spike enough that it reduces. When your CPU gets too high, things like frame rate are going to start suffering. You're going to get jittery. Like things aren't going to move as smoothly. So we have to find this balance between CPU usage and storage. So one of the things that we can do here is we can tell the game to, when the scene loads, is decompress all the sounds that are in that scene or not even on the scene, but decompress all the sounds in the sound bank. So we can still dynamically load a sound bank and decompress all the sounds so that they're now in PCM format. And what that's going to do is it's going to take up more RAM, but it's going to use less CPU. So the cool thing is the game itself in memory, or the game itself in storage is really small, but when I load it, it's going to decompress that. So it's going to allow it to be a lot faster when I'm playing the game. So let's take a look at how we actually pull that case off. We're going to look at two different cases, and let's take a look at how we do that one first. So we're going to do that all from Unity, and let's go to Unity here. So what we want to do, let's go to our different certification scene, decompressing sound banks. Cool. Let's see what I'm gonna do. So we've got this dungeon environment, and for this one, it doesn't even really matter what we don't have to worry about what we're playing here. But if we look at this right here, this one's got the AK bank on script. So it's gonna on awake, it's gonna load dungeon, and it's gonna unload on destroy here. So let's see. I want to do this. Oh, okay. Here. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to say decode compressed data. Bam. And I'm going to get into this little error. So you'll need to define a prepare pool size in the Wwise initialization settings. So the prepare pool, what it's going to do is you have to basically carve out ahead of time the uncompressed memory that you want to use. It's a little confusing, but basically you have to say that when the game is going to get played, we have to carve out the space for these sounds to get loaded into. And I don't know why you have to do that manually. It seems like that should be an automatic thing, but apparently you have to do this. And so the way we're going to do this is say, okay, and we're going to go back into our Wwise initializer right here. And our Wwise initializer right here, this basically needs to be on your main scene all the time. This is what's kind of your main Wwise controlling script. It's what loads all of the other stuff. So if I double click on the initialization settings, we get this little sub window right here. And we have common user settings. You can look through here like voices and pool sizes and all that. But what we care about, I don't even look at this one. What we want to look at here is the Wwise communication settings right here. And in this one right here, what we want to do is we want to set this pool size to, well, we don't even know yet. So let's go back over to Wwise and take a look and see what it's at. So if I hit my F7, go to my pool, and we're looking at dungeon right now. So let's take a look at the dungeon. Oops. Dungeon. So what it shows is that it's about, let's open this up a little bit. So this is my data size. This is the size that is stored on disk. And then when I get into the game, if I decode the thing, it's going to be about 9.2 megabytes. So what we should probably do is we want to carve out about 10 megabytes of memory for this thing right here. So I want over here, it's hard to see, this is 1 megabyte right now. It's hard to, I think. Yeah, that's only 1 megabyte. So we want 10 megabytes, which is 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 10 megabytes right there that I have carved out for my pool size. So the pool size, oh, I'm just doing it for all of these. I guess you can check for different ones. But I want to carve out 10 megabytes of memory for the dungeon as I go in here. So let's see. And so what we'll do is let's go through and play the game again, and I'm going to profile it. So let's go back over here. Let's go into my profiler, which is my F6. And what we want to do is when I play the game, I want to watch to see where this thing gets loaded in here. So again, over here in this world, let's turn all that. My Wwise, I have decode compressed. So what that's going to do is when I load the game, it's going to decompress all the sounds into that. So if we press play, and actually over here, let's connect. And let's see.
Yeah.
Not seeing it. What I'm looking for is there's a thing called, it should be loading up over here. It's called what's called the prepare pool. When it does this, basically when I said I carved out that RAM, what it does is it creates it's called the prepare pool, and don't know why I'm not seeing it. Let me see if I missed something there. I'm not seeing my prepare pool in here. Oh, no, I'm missing it. That's weird. I don't know why I'm not seeing it. Let's see. Did I hit it? Leave the memory. I don't know why I'm not seeing. I'm missing something right now. But what we should see, let's go back and double check here. Decode compressed, and I've got my Wwise initializer script set up to be 10,000. Maybe I just need to save. Probably let's play again. What the hell? What I'm looking for is my prepare pool right here, and I don't know why I'm not seeing it. Let me go to my dungeon. Bummer. I don't know what I'm doing wrong here. Let me just look one more time here.
Hey Jeff, I don't know if this is anything, but I'm seeing down in the corner there it says WiseBank load failed.
Oh,
I don't know if that has to do with this.
maybe I should just
I kept getting that error on my end too with some other stuff.
I'm gonna try generating my sound banks again. Let's try it one more time. Let's see if I. Which one is it? Yeah, I might have. Yeah, which is weird because maybe I missed a step because ambient, that's lava, ambient region, dungeon. Okay. Strange. I had it working before. Well, okay, just in the name of kind of moving things along, I might have missed a step there in the instructions. Yeah, so some of these errors are bad. So like, yeah, if this was the actual, an actual project, thanks for the tip there. But yeah, what I would probably do is you want to go through and stomp all these little bugs out right here. But I'm not getting really the bug in here. So yeah, it's coming from the Unity side. So bank load failed, Unity engine debug. Which one is it? Yeah, I don't know why. I had it working before, so I must have. Oh, bank dungeon failed, aka insufficient memory. Did I not load enough memory in there? Let's go back and try it. I'm just gonna add a bunch of memory in this thing, into my Wwise initializer. Let's add 100 megabytes. Just make it humongous. Which one is that? The callback. Man, it's weird. aka insufficient memory. Must have something. I don't know what. Like this is gonna be tough for me to troubleshoot on the fly because I'm not that strong with it. But I must have missed something here. Let me see if I can find it. Very odd. Let me go back and just see if I can get it to load without. Let's save decompressed. What I want to see if I can find the dungeon over here when I play it. Let's see if. Okay, so my dungeon is showing up right here. So my dungeon is about 2.4 megabytes right now. And that's because this, like as we imagined, this is the compressed version of this thing. So we're seeing the compressed version of it, but when I load it up on decode compressed. Decode compressed. That's something with my Wwise initializer here is not set correctly, which is, maybe I'm using the wrong pool size. Pretty sure that was the right one though. Monitor pool size, Wwise communication. That's the one I want, is the pool size. But maybe I have some other setting here I'm missing right now. But okay, well anyway, what is the idea here though is what happens. I'll just explain what's supposed to happen because I'm missing something right now. What will happen over here is that when I have that selected, you'll get what's called pool. You'll see it. So you don't actually even see the dungeon anymore. So what it's going to do is you carve out for all the things that you want to have unloaded on compressed. So what we would do is we would set this thing to 10 megabytes. And then what we see is the pool size over here. It's called the prepare pool. So the prepare pool is kind of like a container that you can put up all your sounds into, and they're all when the level loads, it's all the uncompressed sounds live in that container, so you don't have to. So the nice thing is it uses up a little bit more RAM, but it's really fast with your CPU. So anything that you have in there is going to be that. And what you can look at, what's cool is you can look at your pool size over here and you can see what it's actually being used over here. And once you start playing your game, you see that the actual usage is over here is going to be like, and so I allocated 10 megabytes, but the actual usage is about 9 megabytes. What I can do is go back over here and readjust this back down to be about 9 megabytes. So you can tailor your prepare pool to be the size that you're actually going to use. And so that's a way to make things really fast with your game, but it does use more RAM. So the other way we can do, one of the other possibilities that we can do here is we can both, like, we can actually also load, we can decompress the game, the sounds upon installation. So right now what we're doing is we're decompressing sounds on the game loading or the scene loading, this on load. But what we can do is we can actually have it decompress all together. And so the catch here though is because what we're doing is we're decompressing the sounds on scene load, or yeah, we'll say scene load. That what it's going to do is it's going to put those in the prepare pool. What it's going to do is that takes time. So if you're loading up something like 200,000 sounds, because for whatever reason, maybe you're playing some music game and you have like a ton of different, like a million different sounds in there, that's going to take a long time for that scene to load. So it may be that you want to actually have the thing decompress on installation of the game. So say you're delivering a mobile game, and you want the download to be really small. So when they download it from, say, whatever the app store is, you want that to be the footprint to be as small as possible. But then once it's installed, we can decompress it. So it's going to be larger on hard disk. It's going to be a little bit larger on hard disk, and it's going to be it'll be the same size when you actually run the game because you're not actually decompressing anything because they're already all decompressed. So you can convert all the things from Vorbis to PCM on installation. So to do something like that, what we would do is say save decoded SoundBank right here. And if we look at, sorry, I want to take a look at this. So if we look over in our SoundBanks folder for a minute here, let's go back over in here, and let's go to F7, and let me look at, say, which one are we looking at here? Yeah, let's look at Dungeon here. So if I right click on Dungeon and say Open Containing Folder, we can look at the region WU or the BNK. So I'm going to click on WBNK. That's the SoundBank. And if we look inside of our hierarchy right here, we see that we have all of our SoundBanks. These are our .bnks right here. We have some XMLs in there. And then we have these WEMs. These WEM files, by the way, those are the actual audio files that are buried in there. And they have this kind of trick to lock these things down. So there are some tricks to unlock these, but if you want to go into a game, like if you dig into a game like on your hard drive that was made with Unity or with Wwise, you can drill down and find your generated sound banks windows, and you can find your WM files. These are the actual audio files. So this is the way that hackers get in and like swipe sounds. This is how you swipe sound effects and that sort of stuff from video games is that you can go in here. So the WM is kind of like a lockdown version of the audio file buried inside of these things. But you can actually, they have some decoders that you can decode WEMs if you want to go in and pull extract the sounds out. It's not legal, you shouldn't do it, but this is how it's done. That you can actually like explore and listen to it and find out how they're done, which is kind of cool. So from an exploratory standpoint, it's totally cool, but don't actually like swipe sounds from these things. I've never done it, so I don't know. I just know I just know of that sort of stuff. So, but we have our dungeon.bnk right here. What we're gonna do is if by now if I go in and in Unity here I say save decoded SoundBank, what it's gonna do is well, let's load this up here. Let's do this. Saving a decoded SoundBank. Okay, and let's go back into this one. And so I'm gonna say save decoded SoundBank right here. Save the game, play the game. Hopefully we don't get too many errors here. And if I go back into that folder that I just created, I should see a decoded SoundBanks right here. So this folder wasn't here prior. What this did is it now has all the Dungeon SoundBank in right here, and this is the decoded version of the SoundBank. So what it did is it converted all the Wwise files into PCM files and stores them in right here. So when I ship the game, it won't have that folder. It just contains all this. But when the game gets loaded for the first time, what it does is it creates all of those PCMs and converts them into this decoded SoundBanks right here. And now when the game plays, it looks first for this one right here, and it's going to load a lot faster because it doesn't have to decode anything, and the sounds are going to play a lot faster, but at the expense of using more memory and more storage. Well, yeah, more hard disk storage. So that's the kind of the trade-off here. And so depending on what's most important. So generally you'll start with just doing everything Vorbis, but as you see that you have some performance hits, you're going to start converting some of those into PCM. The other option is things like, of course, with music, right? So the other way to kind of save on CPU is by streaming from instead of putting it in memory, you can stream it, right? Remember in your Wwise thing, you can actually stream the sounds. So those are kind of our like main strategies for like dynamically loading and resource allocation with memory there. But the big one is just basically like being able to load banks when you need them. And so that's what we're looking at, the three different cases. One is just going to be trigger on enter. The other one's going to be loading it with a scene. Well, I guess those are the two main cases, and then we look at two sub cases of where we can reduce our CPU usage by like using decode compressed and then save the decoded banks right here. So this may be a case where this is going to be, well, especially for things like footsteps and machine guns and things that are triggered very fast and very often. Using Vorbis is usually a bad idea. So to do that, what I would do is create a different. Well, I guess I would create a different sound bank for things that are going to be decoded completely, like decode compressed, and then the other one's going to be where they're going to play. So things like dialogue, where you run into a character every once in a while, where you're like, well, I don't need that. That can totally be compressed as a squish down Vorbis. But if I'm doing something like machine guns or something, a sound that you use very, very often in quick succession, you may want to consider moving that to just save it as a PCM. And if you're working on something like a mobile game, something like Save Decoded Bank may be something that's helpful. But if you're using a lot of sounds, it's going to make the thing kind of bloated, and you may get in trouble, run into some memory issues with that. So yeah, those are the four cases that we're looking at right there. So I'll stop for a second right there. Is there any questions on that? Kind of the overall objective. Like I said, I know you're not retaining everything all the way, but just as an overall objective. Cool. Okay. So that's pretty much going to wrap it for the main meat of what we're going to be talking about today. Next class, what we're going to do is, this is where things get really get interesting, where we start doing triggering from the script. So we have to dive in and we have to do a little bit of code. And the code's not hard. You just follow the instructions, but you have to follow the code. And if you start wrapping your head around how this code works, it makes it so that you can make anything happen. And so this will allow us to say when I shoot a machine gun or when I do a footstep or something like that inside of Unity that I want something to happen. And we can attach it to animations, we can attach it to like events that are happening in the game, like dialogue, all these things, so we can basically start remote controlling Wise from Unity. Not just using these pre-built scripts. Those scripts that we got are great, the AK bank and the AK trigger and all those things. Those are really useful, the pre-built scripts. But there's going to be ones where you have to embed your own script into somebody else's, or like attach your script to some other object that's going to have to be a custom one. So that's what we're going to work on next class. And it's pretty heavy duty, but I think it's pretty awesome once we wrap our heads around it. So. I guess that's all we really had for today. That went faster than I thought it would. I'm sorry I had that one screw up in there, but I guess I can't. I'm gonna hammer on that and see if I can figure out why that is myself. But what I would also do is like then I think what I'm probably gonna do after we hang up here is I'm gonna go through. I'm gonna rebuild a generic scene in Unity and Wise and see if I can recreate these same concepts with my own raw game. And that's when I think things really start to sink in. So that's what I recommend. So in the meantime, what I want you guys to do for next class is I want you to get through this one, the level 3 or whatever, lesson 3 that we just did. So that when we get to the next one, you're all caught up and you're going to be rocking and rolling there. So if you haven't gotten through those, get cranking on them because they're going to start building up. So we have 8 or 9 of these lessons, and so if you're not trying to take a stab at these things, it's gonna build up there. So like I said, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna assign it. You're gonna have to get through 5 by the end of the week, so by Friday. So that's what we're gonna work on. So cool. All right, my friends, I'll stop it here. Actually, let me do attendance real quick. Got it. And